17 plus year. At that time, and for many years, Clyde was a senior executive at the Coca-Cola Company. Clyde is now president and CEO of Enveris, an Atlanta-based technology company operating in the defense and national security space. While I have Clyde to thank for this incredibly timely program today, I also have another reason to thank Clyde. Clyde is a person that sponsored me to join Rotary 12 years ago. With that, I invite Clyde Tuttle to the podium to begin our program.
I was saying I finally did something right, nominating you for membership here, and you've had so far a fabulous and very successful presidency, so congratulations to you. I'm going to take a few minutes to give you a little bit of background on our speaker today, Admiral John Kirby. You've all seen his resume posted on the website, so I'm not going to read that for you. But when John and I started talking about him coming to Rotary, it's now been several months ago, we had no idea the world would look like it does today. And so, as you can imagine, we're going to spend most of the day talking about the current crisis and war in Iran, but we'll probably touch on some of the other national security issues that we have before us today. If there is someone who understands national security of this country, it's Admiral John Kirby. He is the only person who has served in government who has stood behind the podium at the Pentagon, at the U.S. State Department, and for the U.S. National Security Council. And when you look at his background, it's an extraordinary service to this country. We should all be very grateful, and we do thank you for your service, not only in uniform as a naval officer, John, retired from the Navy with 2 stars, a rear admiral, but it is interesting, he has spent his career trying to explain to the world what it all means. And so we are truly, truly blessed today to have you here. But when you think about that career, right, it's, you were the spokesman for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, you were the spokesman for the Chief of Naval Operations. As I mentioned, you was the spokesperson for the U.S. State Department. You served as the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, the Pentagon Press Secretary, the White House National Communications Advisor, and then today you are the director of the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. So again, we decided we were going to take full advantage of John being here in Atlanta to understand where we are. And I'm going to kick things off, John. Imagine you were in your old job. You're probably glad you're not in your old job. But you're standing behind the podium now as the National Communications Director for the National Security Council, and you're trying to help the American people understand what does this all mean vis-a-vis what's going on in Iran. Where would you start? How would you frame the situation we're in today?
Thanks for inviting me to be here. Thanks for all of you for allowing me to come here and spend some time with y'all. I have great respect for what the Rotary Club is, what you represent, what you do, not just here in Atlanta, but around the world. It's really it's all about public service and community service. What you do is giving back and making life better. And that's really important, particularly at a time like this when the country is so divided. To have a group like you dedicated to really trying to find ways to make people together feel better than your fellow citizens. So thank you for your service and what you do. Again, not just here in Atlanta, but around the country and around the world. To your question, I think I go back to, you mentioned all those podiums that I spoke at, but the most common question that I got from reporters Secretary of Defense ordering the carrier to that coast? Why are you spending so much money to support Ukraine? You know, why is it important to help Israel defend itself after the deadly attacks of October 7th? It's always about why. And so, if I was at the NSC today, and if I was briefing from the White House podium right now, I would want to make sure that I understood all the whys, because that's really what the press and the American people want to understand. My mom's 89, she lives down St. Pete where I grew up, and when I was at the White House, and after every briefing, I would get a long text from my mother. Sometimes it was just like she didn't like my tie, or I spoke with my hands too much, but
Grammatical error.
yeah. But oftentimes, you know, it was, I don't understand why you guys are doing what you're doing, or why you're not doing more. And I think, so that would be the key, is to try to figure out the why here. Now, the president did release 2 videos, and Secretary Higgs had a press conference today, and I think they have tried to answer that question, why. I think there's still a lot of confusion out there about what exactly we're trying to achieve through these military strikes and what the end game really looks like. And so I think that's the approach that I would take. And the questions that I would be prepared for if I was the press secretary is, how long is this going to last? How much is it going to cost? You know, what kind of future force are you going to apply here? What kind of governance do we expect or do we want to help bring about in Iran long term? Again, I just don't think, again, we're only 48 hours into this, so I want to be mindful of that, but I don't think there's been a real clear case for that.
You and I were talking earlier today about history, right? You go back to, it's not just the 79 history, it's going all the way back to the coup in 1953 that was where the U.S. and the CIA were intimately involved in that. It's certainly sort of leading up to 78 and 79, and in so many ways, this was of our own making, one would argue. It's taken sort of, and then we were talking about the fact that I assume the U.S., starting with President Reagan, has had on the bookshelves the playbook in order to bring the regime down. Why has it taken 47 years for this to play itself out, and why now? What's the impetus?
Well, it hasn't played itself out yet. We now know that the Supreme Leader is dead, and some of his leadership is dead, but that doesn't mean that the regime has fallen. So we're not sure exactly how this is going to play out. I think Iran's a special case in that you're right. I mean, American involvement in Iranian politics goes well before the Iranian Revolution of 1979. And so saying this is just about correcting 47 years of mismanagement is a little disingenuous, since we've been involved in the Middle East for much longer than that, certainly in Iran. Iran's a special case in that it's a big country, 2 million people, very militarily capable, has a vast network of proxies throughout the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and then these Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria who do have some punch available. Now, look, to be honest, they are much weaker than they've ever been. They were weaker than they've ever been when Joe Biden was in the White House. But they're certainly weaker still now. But it is a country that I think past presidents have had to take very seriously from a military perspective. And I think also past presidents were cognizant of the history here. And the struggles we have had with regime change in the past, in the Middle East and elsewhere around the world, I think we're reticent to try to get us into yet another Middle East conflagration. And again, we're only 48 hours into this, but that's one of the things that worries me, is where this is going, just from a regional perspective. You're seeing Iran strike back. They hit our headquarters in Bahrain. They've hit targets in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar. so there is a possibility here, and we're already seeing it, that this becomes more of a regional conflict, not just about Iran. And I think that's where things can get pretty unpredictable.
Give us some insight here in terms of the risks to America, both in terms of our military infrastructure in the region, but maybe more specifically to us sitting here at home. Some would fear that we have another 9/11 in the making because their terrorist capability goes far and wide. Help us understand what you see as the risk to us as Americans, again, from a military point of view, but for those of us sitting here in this room.
I hope that I'm wrong about all this, and I hope that from what I've heard from the president, from the administration, that they're right, that this can usher in a more stable Middle East. And there are plenty of people who believe that that could be the outcome here. I mean, I make no defense of the Supreme Leader or the Iranian regime. I stand behind nobody in line in my hatred of how they have really wrecked and murdered tens of thousands of their own citizens, as well as they have blood on their hands of American troops, Iraq, Afghanistan, in Syria. I'm glad that the Supreme Leader is gone. I'm shedding no tears, and if this leads to the fall of the regime, I think in the aggregate that's a good thing. But the question is, what comes next, and how long does it take to get to next, and what does that look like? And it's hard to imagine that this is going to lead to a diminution of American military force and posture in the Middle East. I mean, we're pretty aggressively postured in that, even before Mr. Trump added more forces. And no matter how long this takes, if it does last a month, as the president says it will, we're still going to have a lot of force there, a lot of capability there. And when you forward deploy, when you have an expeditionary military, readiness is a constant concern. So I hope, my expectation is that military leaders, Central Command Commander, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, all the heads of the services are thinking through what their readiness concerns are going to be as this progresses through time. Because readiness of your forces isn't just about the stockpiles. It's not just about the weapons you have in your arsenal. It's about the wear and tear on the ships, wear and tear on the airplanes, wear and tear on the people. There's a real readiness curve if you don't watch it. And this military in the last year has been very, very active. From striking Venezuela to striking Nigeria to stuff they're still doing in the Indo-Pacific, and now, of course, what we've added to the Middle East. And to sustain that kind of power overseas for any length of time there is a readiness aspect that you have to take into account. People get tired. I mean, one of the aircraft carriers that's involved here was just off the coast of Venezuela not so long ago. They haven't been home in a long, long time, and that ship hasn't been serviced in a long, long time. So there's a concern there. I think it's a fair question about the threat here to the homeland. I have no access to intelligence. I don't know what the terrorist threat looks like here, but I am concerned that our Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the intelligence communities have been so laser focused over the last year on immigration issues that I'm just concerned that perhaps some of our counterterrorism capabilities and some of our counterterrorism focus might have diminished. Now, I say that with the full caveat that the director of the Counterterrorism Center yesterday came out and said, not to worry, we haven't lost our focus, we haven't lost our intelligence capabilities or our ability to disrupt threats. I hope he's right, I really do. But the DHS in particular, which is charged and was set up by President Bush to deal with domestic threats, has been very, very focused on immigration now and not terrorism. So we'll see how they adapt here, but it is a significant concern. I'm glad to hear that the director of the CTC yesterday said they are because Iran does have a vast terrorist network. They do have capabilities to conduct attacks outside of the region. So that's something we need to be mindful of.
So just to pull the thread on that bit, do you, you know, the question is sort of who are the winners and losers here, you know, and for example, when you look at the terrorist networks, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, you know, are they losers here? Do you feel like, will they be in some way diminished through this whole exercise?
I hope so. I mean, again, President Trump's not wrong when he says that Iran and its proxies are weaker now than they were before. And in part, that's because of the strikes he took back in June. I mean, there's no question about that. But they were weaker even still when we were in office, and Iran was far weaker than when we came into office in the Biden administration. So they have been on this trajectory, this down trajectory, and their proxies have likewise become less powerful than they were before. I hope that the result of this is an Iran that no longer poses a threat to the region or to the rest of the world. But I think it's just too soon to know who the winners or losers here. I mean, we're only 48 hours into this. I mean, look at Russia, for instance. You know, they get a lot of their oil from the Middle East, although they have a pretty thriving domestic oil capability. You know, there's one argument that I've heard, and I think is legitimate, is that, you know, Russia would like nothing better than for the United States to get involved in another war in the Middle East that keeps our military busy, that maybe degrades our readiness over time. On the other hand, Russia and Iran have formed a pretty close relationship over the last 3 years in Ukraine. Many of Russia's drones and some of their missile components have come from Iran. They have developed this close relationship where Iran has really become a huge supporter of the Russian military. Well, that's going to be in question right now. And so if you're Vladimir Putin, I'm not really sure, you know, what he's thinking right now. Same for China. You know, a quarter of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. That strait is now effectively closed. People are not shipping oil through the strait right now. We'll see where that goes. But that's going to have an effect on the global economy. It's going to have an effect on the Chinese economy. On the other hand, I'm sure there are members of generals in the People's Liberation Army that likewise are glad to see the United States focused on something other than preventing their aggressive activities in the South China Sea or their threats to Taiwan. So I think it's just too soon to know who's going to win and who's going to lose.
So let's turn to energy. You mentioned that. The common theme here between Venezuela and Iran is oil. We saw what happened again in the late 70s when all of that came apart, oil prices spiked, inflation, etc. What do you think is going to strategically happen here with the Strait of Hormuz shut down, oil prices? We saw that this morning, are already beginning to spike. Is this a short term or a longer term? And what do you think the impact will be on the American economy?
Again, it's too soon to know. One of the, let me back up even further. You mentioned Ronald Reagan. When I joined the Navy in it was a long time ago. My first deployment.
It was in the last century.
My first deployment was to the Persian Gulf. You might remember that Ronald Reagan ordered the U.S. Navy into the Gulf to escort tankers, oil tankers, in and out, because we were concerned about the war between Iran and Iraq, particularly Iran's ability to close the strait. And so that was my first job aboard ship, moving tankers in and out. It is one of the most vital choke points in the world, because so much of the oil economy comes from the Northern Arabian Gulf, Northern Persian Gulf. And throughout those years, you talked about plans that presidents have. One set of plans that every president since Reagan has had is, you know, how do you deal with the Strait of Hormuz being closed? My son just served not too long ago on a minesweeper in Bahrain. Their whole mission was to make sure that the Iranians couldn't close the Strait of Hormuz through the use of mines. So this is something that the U.S. Navy and the U.S. government has been focused on for a long time. And I think there's still it's still an active question about whether the Iranians Iranians will militarily try to close the strait. And I know, I don't know, but just listening to Secretary of Defense talk this morning, and listening to President Trump, that the U.S., part of the U.S. military strikes have been on Iranian naval capabilities and naval ports. My assumption is that those strikes are designed to prevent Iran from militarily closing the strait. But right now, as you and I are sitting here, the strait's effectively closed because commercial shipping companies are simply not willing to take the risk. So Iran doesn't really need to put lines in the strait to have an effect on the flow of oil. Now again, how long that subsists, I don't know. Will it require, might it require U.S. naval escorting the way it was in 1988 when I went there? It might. And then that introduces a whole new cost and a whole new set of risks if you're going with U.S. ships in the escorting business. But again, it's too soon to know. I do think, again, depending on how long companies are not willing to go into the strait, there certainly could be a short-term, near-term effect on the price of oil, which eventually will have an effect on the price of gasoline later on down the road. So we'll have to see. But things like this, operations like this, even for the most noble reasons, and some of you might support it, some of you might not, are always that none of them are cost-free. I think we're already starting to see it.
You've served as advisors to both Republican and Democratic presidents. You've sat in the Situation Room. Russia, China, China, most of the oil coming out of Iran is headed to China, or should be, or would be. What would you imagine the conversation look like today vis-a-vis the Russia-China factor within that national security space? And I would imagine there are conversations that are on the back channel going on with both the Russians and the Chinese.
I hope so. I think, again, I'm not in the room, obviously, now. I'm sure that part of the discussion they're having today is looking at how the Russian leadership and the Chinese leadership are, what they're saying, what they're advising people. We'll do the best we can to glean some perspective about how they're thinking of it. You see their public statements, but that often doesn't necessarily really reflect where they are privately. So I would imagine that the Trump administration is trying to get a sense of not only what are the Russians and the Chinese thinking about this, but what, if anything, they're prepared to do about it. I don't see them either one getting involved militarily or trying to stop or impede American operations, but I suspect that they're making adjustments to their own force posture. If I'm Vladimir Putin, I'm thinking, how am I going to make adjustments to my war in Ukraine? Because Iran's been a significant supplier, like I said, of drones and missile components. So they have to be making these kinds of calculations. What's interesting to me is going to be to see, and I suspect that they're thinking about this, is what the implications are to other conflicts in other parts of the world or other initiatives. Again, Mr. Witkoff was not only the lead negotiator here with Iran, but he was also the lead negotiator with Ukraine. There was going to be a spillover effect. And with President Xi, I know for a fact while we were in office, he was very closely watching our support to Ukraine. And our support was very full-throated, providing Ukraine directly with weapons and ammunition and resources to fight their war. And there's no question the Chinese were looking at that as they considered their options on Taiwan and what the international community, what the United States might or might not be willing to do. Should he move on Taiwan? Now he's watching this. Is that going to factor into his thinking on Taiwan and the tensions there? I think there's no question.
And what about North Korea?
Yeah, look, I think in North Korea you actually do have a nuclear armed state. Iran didn't have nuclear weapons. North Korea does have them. And you have a regime that is obviously cruel and autocratic and actually does present today a physical threat. Not just to the South Korean people, but to the Japanese, to the Australians, to us. They have missiles now that have the range to hit Alaska and Hawaii. And by some estimates, even more than that. And you don't really hear anybody talking about that right now. Nobody's really trying to solve that problem. And it's been a bedeviling problem for multiple administrations over a long period of time. It's a significant threat in the region that I would hope this administration is also looking at. Not necessarily to strike North Korea, that's not what I mean, but to try to work diplomatically to curb it.
So just, I'm going to pivot back to our home soil here and the politics of all this, but before I do, the president originally said 2 days, now it's 4 to 5 weeks. You have as much insight as anybody in terms of the military capability that's been brought to bear. What do you think in terms of neutralizing at least what they have on the ground?
You know, again, it's just impossible to know. I watched Secretary Hegseth's press conference this morning, and one thing was crystal clear to me, that at least from a military perspective, the U.S. military believes its mission is to degrade Iranian capabilities so that they no longer pose a threat to our interests in the region. That doesn't just mean their nuclear ambitions, but their ballistic missile capabilities. And Mr. Hegseth cited that on more than one occasion in his press conference. We have already done a lot of damage to their nuclear capabilities. Mr. Trump struck them in June. These strikes that we're beginning to see throughout the country over the last 48 hours are going after air defense capabilities, command and control, ballistic missile capabilities, and of course, as we talked about, the Navy. So, again, without seeing the battle damage assessment, I have to assume that the U.S. military, which does its job very well, has done a commendable job in degrading these capabilities. At what point, if in fact that is the end game here, at what point do we say, okay, enough's enough, we've knocked them back so far that they can't pose a threat anymore? I don't know. We're still seeing Iranian strikes on neighboring countries even today. So clearly, not all their capabilities are gone. It could take weeks, it could take months, I don't know. But I think that's, back to your very first question, Clyde, I think that's a fair question that the American people have a right to an answer to. Is how long is this going to go on? And what, in fact, when are we going to be able to declare mission accomplished? And what does mission accomplished look like? And I just don't think, there's been enough transparency.
We'll come back to the regime change issue. Let's pivot for a second to domestic politics.
Oh, good. Something easy.
Now, I warned John, whatever you say here, you will annoy somebody in the room. I certainly did that during my presidency. But anyway, we won't get into that. Maybe just give everybody a quick tutorial on the War Powers Resolution, the War Powers Act of 1973. Because, I talked about this. Some presidents have recognized that, others have not. You're getting a lot of rhetoric out of members of Congress. We saw this over the weekend. It's largely falling across partisan lines, but you have seen Democrats. Fetterman was an example. It says, no, this is right, and we would support it. And then you've sort of seen others who are pushing back. Senator Warner's a good example. Well, where do you think this will go in terms of Congress? And what role should Congress be playing in this debate?
The second question is easier to answer than the first. I don't want to state the obvious, but it is worth revisiting how the Constitution delineates war powers. The founders didn't trust a standing army or a standing navy to exist. They were fearful of military dictatorship, and they were fearful of autocratic decision making when it comes to defense. And so they held to Congress, to the elected people of the country the power to declare war, to say the United States is now at war. But in Article 2, in the part of the Constitution that governs the executive branch, there is the ability for the president as commander-in-chief. So Congress declares war, the president conducts war. There's enough flexibility in the Article 2 language, and you can go look at it, see it today, for the president to act in an imminent defense of the United States if he deems necessary. If in fact consultation with Congress and a congressional declaration of war would take so long that he couldn't, as commander-in-chief, defend our interests, he has the authority to act. And we've seen presidents do that certainly since the end of World War II, actually throughout our history, but in the last 50, 60 years, I mean, many presidents have availed themselves of that power. President Biden did when I was there. President Obama did. President Clinton did. Both Presidents Bush did. The difference is that in most, not all, to be fair, but in most of those cases, they operated imminent to deal with an imminent threat, but there was still consultations with Congress and authority granted from Congress for the discrete use of military force. You might remember after 9/11, President Bush got an authorization, two authorizations to use military force in defense of the United States after the 9/11 attacks. And those authorizations are actually still in effect, and President Obama used them, President Biden used them. When it came to threats by Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups like ISIS. In this case, you aren't seeing that connection to those existing authorities. And so I think you're seeing many members of Congress, not just from the Democratic Party, but even from the Republican Party, say, we need to have a voice here. And they do. They're not wrong about that. They do need to step up and have and vote and have a voice in the way the military is being used right now, because it hasn't been made. And again, I admit to ignorance here. I don't have access to the information anymore, but I don't believe the administration has made a compelling case that there has in fact been an imminent threat that warrants this use of military force without congressional authorization. So what I would hope to see, and what I think most Americans would like to see, is the Congress executing and exercising their Article 1 responsibilities, which is to determine whether or not to use of military force over a period of time. War Powers Resolution allows the president to use force without congressional authorization for a short period of time to get that authorization, and that's the process that I hope happens. Now, whether it does or not, I don't know. I mean, this particular Congress has not, in the past, shown a desire or a willingness to exercise many of their Article 1 responsibilities. Just have to see where that goes.
Last question, then I really want to open this up for everybody else, because I know there are a lot of questions, because we're all trying to understand, to John's point, what does it mean, where is it going, and how is this going to play out? But I saw recently over the weekend, it was an interesting comparison to the Islamic Revolution, and it said, it is on the par, it was on par of the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution in terms of far-reaching implications, not just within those boundaries, but really globally. And if you think that the Islamic Revolution was in fact that seismic, right? And then I saw one of the members of the Iranian diaspora refer to this as a Berlin Wall moment. You think this is a Berlin Wall moment for that region?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I compare it to the collapse of the Berlin Wall, but is it a seismic event? Yes. Will you be telling your grandchildren about this one day? Absolutely. I mean, this is, however this turns out, and we don't know, however this turns out, it's going to have long-lasting ramifications in the Middle East. And I want to go back to what I said before. I mean, I'm worried about it. I hope that my worries are unfounded. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that this leads to a government in Iran that is responsive to the Iranian people, that they have a vote and a voice in it. They have been abused and maligned and murdered by their own government now, for going on 50 years. They deserve better. And it's a young population, as I said earlier, that wants to reach out to the rest of the world. They want to be a part of the international community. And if that's the result of this, then that's all to the good. I'm just concerned and worried, as I think many people are, and my mother is, about where this is going. But either way, Clyde, whether it becomes a resounding success and literally leads to a new Iran and a new era of peace in the Middle East, or it results in a long, drawn-out, ugly conflict and a civil war in Iran that takes even more lives and presents more of a threat to our interests in the region. Either way, it's a seismic event. And if you, I don't know if y'all keep journals or diaries, I do, been doing it for a long time. But if you do, I'd go home tonight and I'd write in it about what you think and what you feel, how you're reacting to this. Because one day, I'm telling you, your great-grandchildren, they're gonna want to hear and read how you reacted to what's going on right now, because it's that big.
Last thing, and then I really will turn it over to everybody on the floor. Are our allies with us on this?
Some are. I thought it was extraordinary. Now they've changed their mind. Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, allowed the use of some of their air bases for American defensive purposes only, very, very limited. But I was stunned that a few days ago when they came out and said you cannot use Diego Garcia to conduct these operations. I mean, think about that. That's the United Kingdom. That's since almost the beginning, and our strongest ally. And they have reservations. And even when they allowed that use of these facilities, again, they tailored it for defensive purposes only. Extraordinary. And other European nations are clearly they're not maybe openly opposing this, but they're certainly not endorsing it, and they're not allowing their military or their forces to be involved. Now, some of our allies in the Middle East, obviously, Israel is part and parcel of this operation, and partnering with the U.S. military very, very actively and very transparently. Other of our allies in the region, or partners in the region, some of the Gulf allies, they apparently have warned against this, didn't want to see this happen. But now that they've been struck because they host American troops and facilities on their soil, they have offered tacit support. So again, are they allies with us or not? It kind of depends on what ally you're talking about and to what degree they're willing to either participate or support. What didn't happen here is any overt effort by the administration to secure international support going forward, to convene and there was no discussion at the UN Security Council, no resolution, there was no effort to build a coalition. It was really the United States and Israel kind of acting on their own. Some countries now have come along as a result of the strikes they've suffered, but there was no effort to use the convening power of the United States, the leadership, to bring together a true coalition of the willing to conduct these strikes. And that bothers me too. I mean, you can argue all you want, and people have, and people should, about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Obama's airstrikes in Libya, Bush 41's Desert Storm. In all of those cases, there was an active effort, a transparent effort, to get the international community on side and supportive. And that not only adds a sense of legitimacy to what you're doing, because the international community is with you, but it also contributes to better military capabilities. Our allies are not defunct. They're not just leeches that are sucking off of American military power. They're very capable in their own way. Sometimes they have capabilities we don't have. And having them contribute, again, not only adds legitimacy to the effort and credibility to the effort, but it does add real capability. And I worry that there wasn't even enough for me. So again, I say 48 hours in, we're going to have to see how this goes and whether Allied support will increase or decrease or be moderated based on how things are going.
So I might, maybe, okay, now I took it up. All right, anybody that'd like to ask a question, please feel free to go to the
A bunch of shy people.
I warned you, John. That's all I have to say.
This is why we started early.
Admiral, thank you for your service. I think you're very nice time for the day, and we appreciate that. I'd love for you to comment on Senator Mark Kelly's video to the troops to defy illegal orders and the administration's position on retaliation of it.
Yeah. I'm going to be straight up and honest with you. I wasn't, and at least in one case, I know one of the, personally know one of the politicians who contributed to that. I felt it was unfortunate, the video itself was unfortunate and unnecessary. The military, they know that, military professionals know that they aren't required to obey illegal orders. They know their responsibilities, and I didn't really believe that the video was necessary to do. They know that, and I worried a little bit that by doing the video, it just potentially drew the American military into politics in this country. The American military needs to stay out of politics, so it's about being able. When I was in uniform, I didn't even vote. And so I worried about that when I saw it. I gotta be honest with you, this is the first time I've said this, but it bothered me. That said, there is nothing that those elected representatives said in that video that was wrong. There was nothing seditious about it. They didn't tell the troops, don't obey Donald Trump. They said you have an obligation not to obey illegal orders, which is true. It's right there in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So there was, while it was, in my personal opinion, unnecessary, it wasn't illegal, it wasn't seditious, it wasn't wrong, and it's nothing more than, in my view, political theater. To call a senator back on threaten to call him back on the active duty to try to punish him. And you already start to see the legal cases falling apart for exactly that reason, that it's an illegitimate effort.
In today's world, we are seeing actionable intelligence from multiple sources coming together, which identified where the Supreme Leader was with other leaders in Iran. But then we're told that it was the Israeli military that struck where the Supreme Leader was. And yet we know it was a joint effort. Is there any reason for us to think of these things, to delineate the actions of the United States military or the Israeli military, or are they interchangeable? And can you comment on that?
The easy answer, we say, I can't comment on that.
Not allowed.
Yes, you gave me an out, which you should never give a spokesman. But let me, I want to caveat my answer by saying I don't have access anymore. I'm not involved in any of these deliberations as I was in the previous administration. I don't know the intelligence picture. I don't know what they're seeing, and I certainly don't know what conversations that we have had with the Israeli military about who's going to strike what target and how. So I'm unqualified to answer that, and I'm not trying to dodge your question. I just want to be honest with you. Just as a spectator, and I'm just the same as you, I'm just seeing what I'm seeing on the news. It certainly appears as if the U.S. military and the IDF are working in concert on some of these targets. They may not be striking them together, but my assumption is that they're at least doing it with knowledge of what the other is doing, and maybe even some sharing of information as they delineate who's going to hit what and with what. Secretary Haig addressed this in broad terms this morning, saying that the Israeli military did conduct that particular strike, and he lauded their efforts and the effect and the outcome that it had. But this goes back to what Clyde's last question was about the allies with Europe, without you, and sort of if you're gonna undertake an operation of this magnitude, of this seismic quality, you wanna have, most administrations would wanna have as much international support and allied cooperation and collaboration as possible. And again, we're just not seeing that right now.
Thank you, Clyde. Thank you, John. It's on the news now, and not surprising, that Hezbollah in Lebanon has responded to this attack, and so Lebanon is entering the conflict out of their own accord. Hamas, it would seem, also being funded by Iran, would have activity in Gaza as a result of this. They won't remain silent. And any other Iranian-sponsored terrorist organizations in the Middle East will respond to this. And so containment of this action seems very unlikely. When we talk about the Iranian people rising up against the government, they will have a very hard time organizing to rise up against the government in the face of the Islamic Republic, the Islamic Guard, who we have killed the leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard this summer, and we apparently killed the leader of it in the attacks yesterday. According to news sources, Khomeini and the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard appointed people who would fill all the key positions down to the fourth person if they were to have deaths like we've had in the last 2 days. So my question is, isn't it obvious that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard will be the leader of any opposition that the people could cause to happen? And won't that be the way that that this is put down by an organization that already exists, instead of by some grassroots effort by the people of Iran to fight against an organization like that?
That's a terrific question, and I think what's obvious now, 48 hours in, is that the IRGC isn't going anywhere. You're right, they are continuing to strike targets in the region through their proxies, but also from homeland. And you're also right that this is an organization that had succession plans built in for a long time. I mean, during Trump's first term, he killed Soleimani, the key leader of the IRGC. And again, I shed no tears over that. But
His replacement was killed.
That's right. The Iranians reacted as you would expect that they would. So yes, they have succession plans. I mean, so do we. But so far, again, 48 hours in, the IRGC is still firmly in control, at least of their military capabilities, whatever capabilities they have left. The Iranian people, as I said earlier, they deserve better than that. But they have not had, and I'm not suggesting that they can, I'm just saying that they have not had, over the last 50 years, the ability to really develop an opposition to the regime, or civil society as we know it. They haven't had, I mean, when they did try to rise up, as recently as just a few months ago, they were slaughtered by the same people that are now still in control of their weapons capabilities. Again, it's hard to know where this is going long term, but in the short term, as you and I are talking, I agree that right now it looks like the IRGC is still, the regime components are still in control. There's two things that bother me, and again, I want to stress again, I hope I'm wrong about all this stuff, but one was, I saw an interview where President Trump said that he thought the model in Venezuela fit well for what's going on in Iran. So aside from the fact we're talking about two different countries, two different parts of the world, two different cultures and all If you remember, when he absconded with Mr. Maduro, brought him here to face justice, again, perfectly warranted, him facing justice, I mean, he left Maduro's regime in control, and they still aren't in control. And so if Venezuela is your model, then that might convey to you that he'd be willing to leave some of the regime in control in Iran. And I'm not sure how I square that with what he has communicated to the Iranian people. This is your moment, this is your time, stand up, I'm going to be with you, the United States is going to be with you. But yet, I might be willing to leave the regime, the same people that murdered you in the streets, in control. The other thing he said the other day that I haven't seen really get a lot of pickup in the press is he granted them immunity. The IRGC, if you lay down your arms, you'll have absolute immunity. In other words, you'll be able to either stay in power or not be prosecuted for your crimes against the Iranian people. So I worry about the message this sends to, this gets to your real point about civil society and the chance for the Iranian people to actually develop their own government if, in fact, the United States is willing to leave the regime in power and give those who persecuted these crimes against the Iranian people, leave them in control, leave them without any legal ramifications or consequences. That doesn't speak well to me of where this is eventually going for the Iranian people, who, as I said, they more than deserve a better government, a government that's responsive to them and to their needs and to the futures that they want or they seek. And again, I just, it's hard to square those comments with that desire.
Hi, Lee Zach from Agnes Scott College, and formerly the head of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. My question follows up on what you were just talking about. It seems we went into this with some of our tools, but not all of our tools. Well, some of those include our soft power tools. We talked about the fall of the Berlin Wall. We talked about other major regime changes. And the U.S. government always had tools for humanitarian assistance, for capacity building, to be able to come in and help. We saw the Arab Spring, how a different void was filled. What tools do we have now that USAID has been abandoned and dismantled, now that some of the other humanitarian areas of assistance with respect to providing humanitarian assistance through our not-for-profits no longer exist?
Very few, very little. But ma'am, your question presumes that the administration wants to have those soft power tools available to them. I don't think they do. I mean, they did dismantle USAID. They are in the process of dismantling. Please sit down. Please sit down. I'm an admiral, and I love it when people stand up. They've dismantled much of our ability to communicate overseas with international audiences through Voice of America, Radio Free Europe. But again, I think from almost the beginning of this administration, they've demonstrated a desire to move away from soft power altogether. It's costly, it's timely, there's not a lot of great metrics for success. This is them making them think through it. And it takes too long. Just looking at the decisions they've made, they seem to be using the military tool first. There was, I'm sure you all know, the Powell Doctrine, which is the military should be the last tool, the last resort. The diplomacy, politics, economic leverage should be used first. And only use the military when you absolutely need it. This administration has turned that on its end and now reaches for the military tool first and foremost. And their supporters would tell you, hey, it's been effective, right? We got Maduro in a jail in New York City. We got rid of some bad terrorists in Nigeria by striking. And in June, President Trump said he obliterated it, but most of the analysis indicates that he simply severely damaged the Iranian nuclear capability. And then now we see what's happened over the last 48 hours. He's basically, the eliminated the Supreme Court. So they would, their defenders would tell you, hard power works. It's having practical effects. The real question, again, back to my mom, it's like, where is this going long term? And is that a sustainable use of the United States military? A lot of people, and I'm one of them, quite frankly, would argue that it's not. Yes, the military is incredibly professional and capable. We're seeing that. They're doing their job right now with incredible professionalism. And sadly, we've lost 4 already. But is that a sustainable model for the future? Is that really going to transform the Middle East the way I think and I hope we want to see a transformation occur? And I personally don't believe that's the case. But your question presumes that this administration actually values soft power, and they don't. And again, we could argue back and forth whether that's right or not, but they don't.
I'm assuming we can't succeed without it.
Look, I'm a child of the 80s myself, and I saw for myself as a young naval officer the incredible power of soft power, of the United States being involved in information efforts and being involved in humanitarian assistance and all that can do to improve not only our standing in the world and our credibility, but our ability to influence events. We're not omnipotent, even in the best of circumstances, even under Ronald Reagan. We couldn't control everything, but we had the seat at the table because we were involved, because we demonstrated a selfless interest in the well-being of other people around the world. It wasn't really selfless. We knew that if we could make their lives better, maybe it could improve economic stability, political stability in that part of the world, and we wouldn't have to deploy troops there. I mean, there is a calculus here for the use of soft power, but I'm sad to see that it's just not being respected or even cultivated right now.
So my question is a great follow-on to that because of you mentioned the use of military power first. So we have had an all-volunteer force for 50 years, and it has increased professionalism and legality, but it has come at the cost of isolation and potentially best use of that resource. So I wanted to, and we've had also a degradation of public service, and this is Rotary, so service above self. What do you think, not just about conscription or mandatory military service, but national service of any kind, how that might be achieved, if you think it is a valuable tool in the box, predicated on the idea that if everyone serves, everyone has skin in the game, whether it's military or not, but do you see any models that work, or just wanted to get your thoughts on that?
My grandfather served aboard a battleship in World War I, USS Utah, which was later sunk in Pearl Harbor. My father was on an aircraft carrier in the 1950s. I come from a big Irish Catholic family, 5 boys, 1 girl. Dad told us when we were young, all of us, boys anyway, you live in the greatest country in the world, you're going to do something to pay it back. And my dad's definition of paying the country back was military service. So even though Nixon got rid of the draft in 1974 in the Kirby House, there was conscription. Every one of us had to go, all of us. I went, 3 of us went Navy, 1 went Marine Corps, 1 went the Army. He would not let my sister join the Air Force the way she wished. She was a little old-fashioned in that regard, but she went on to be a nurse at a veterans hospital. Dad believes strongly in national service and paying back this great country of ours. And I'm the only one, of all the boys, I'm the only one that stayed in. My brothers all did their time. I met my wife in the Navy. She was a naval officer. Her father was a warrant officer in the Navy. My daughter married a naval officer whose father was a submarine captain. Nobody cheers for West Point football in our house. And my son was a naval officer. I'm very proud of that family legacy, just in my family. And I know that there's a similar legacy in many, many other families around the country. If you were to walk around the halls of the Pentagon today, and you went up to 10 random service members in uniform, I guarantee you that at least 9 of the 10, if not all 10, would tell you that they either have a relative who is serving now or had a relative who served in the past. The Kirby family is not special at all in this regard. And while we're proud of it, and I know those other families are proud of that legacy of service, I do worry, and have for a long time, that the American military is becoming somewhat of a Spartan class. You know, Athens and Sparta, Athens a democracy, and everybody served, and then after the war was over, they went back to their lives. In Sparta, the military, the army was a separate class, literally living outside the city-state and training and developing skills, and never the twain shall meet. And that worries me, because the military is increasingly becoming sort of an insular society. So few, less than 1% of the population are served. And so when we go to war, like we're going to war now, I'm not suggesting that the American people are ignoring this. I don't think that's the case, but it's going to be too easy over time for them to not feel it the way we have felt it in the past. I am not suggesting we return to the draft or conscription. I think that all volunteer force has proven itself, as it has in the last 48 hours, as the most lethal, the most capable military in the world. Secretary Hegseth was 1,000 times right today when he talked about the professionalism with which our troops are conducting these operations. But the burden is falling on an increasingly smaller number. And when you're talking about now wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which went on for almost 20 years, we don't talk as much about that generation of veteran and what they're going through right now. We're going to be living with the effects of those wars, not just the wounds and seen and unseen that those troops have suffered, but that their families are going to be dealing with in future generations. It's just too easy to kind of look the other way and forget that, and that bothers me. This gets now, I'm going to actually try to answer your question. I do think, back to Chuck Kirby, my dad, there's value in national service. I think I'm in favor of exploring options or alternatives where every young American has to do something, whether it's join the forestry service for a couple of years or civic service opportunities, not necessarily the military, but I think it's important, I think, for every young American to, at least for a little bit of the time after their education is complete, to give back to the country in some way. It doesn't have to be the military. I think that's important, because I think it does, back to the mission of the Rotary Club, it's about your community, it's about civic service, it's about giving back and showing appreciation for the advantages that you have in this country, and finding ways to ease the burden and the suffering of your fellow citizens. And I think there's value to that. Now, how would you do that? I don't know. But I'm in favor of some sort of mandatory national service.
I'm a journalist, spent a lot of time in the Middle East, done a lot of national security reporting over the years, and I want to ask you about something completely different than what's happening right now. As a spokesman, there's a dance between what happens with you and journalists trying to get answers to questions that you don't necessarily want to answer. And there's also a tension, I presume, from talking to friends who had jobs like yours, between what you have to say to represent the government and what you feel personally. So my two questions. One, what issue did you have the biggest internal struggle with in terms of what you had to represent as opposed to what you thought personally? And what's the question you were always hoping you would never be asked?
There's a saying in my profession that you have to respond to every question. You don't have to answer them. So I'm going to respond to your first question. I would rather not get into my wife, let me back up. About 15 years ago, my wife bought me a sign that I used to hang on my desk, on my office door, that says, "I don't necessarily agree with everything I say." Which is a great motto for any press secretary. It's also great for Irish Catholics. And I took that to heart. I mean, your job as a spokesman is to represent, to defend, to articulate after the fact. Before the fact of a decision being made or a policy being set upon, your job as a spokesman is to advise the boss, to be able to go into the room with candor, moral courage, and say, if you embark upon this, here are the headlines you're going to get, here's the effect, here's the questions I'm going to get, and are you comfortable with me answering it in this way? Sometimes those discussions lead to policy changes. You know, if the spokesman says, hey, I really don't think you should do it this way. Sometimes that matters, sometimes it doesn't. I didn't win every argument, but I was never afraid to give my honest opinion. And that includes right up to the President of the United States in the Oval Office. I was never bashful about providing my views. And I'll say this about President Biden, he was never, ever, ever bashful about asking me if he felt that I was being quiet. He called on me. And he never failed to listen. Again, it doesn't mean that everything I said changed his mind, but he wanted to know what I thought. And I'm going to respect the privacy and the confidence of those discussions, and I don't want to talk about what my personal views were on any of these issues. I can just tell you that every time I went to the podium, and you can pick the conflict, you can pick the controversy if you want, Afghanistan withdrawal, the war in Gaza, the war in Ukraine. I knew when I went to the podium that I had had an opportunity before doing that to express my views. I had an opportunity to shape how I was going to defend it and articulate it, and that I had the trust and confidence of the boss. Whether it was President Biden, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I always felt like I had that confidence. I don't want to betray that confidence, but it is when I speak to young spokesmen and women, I advise them to, you come into any discussion and the job with a set of values and principles that you have to adhere to. But you also have to remember that your job is to explain and to defend and to articulate. And as long as you've had the ability to express your views and get them on the table, then you can do that job with much more credibility and authenticity. When I made lieutenant commander, which was about the 10-year mark in the Navy, nobody expected me to make lieutenant commander. Not even Mom. If you'd seen my fitness reports, you'd understand. But I thought, holy man, I'm at 10 years now, and that's a magic number in the military because if you stay in after 10, you're in for 20. You might as well get to 20. So I sat down and I thought, I got to start taking my job seriously because I hadn't. And I wrote down a set of rules for myself. It ended up being 13, not because I meant 13. I stopped writing. It was 13 rules. One of them is always be able to separate the personal from the professional. A spokesman in that way is a little bit like a lawyer. You're representing a client. You have to separate your personal stuff from your professional duties, and you have to compartmentalize. Sometimes you have to take those personal feelings of yours and put them in a box. When you go up to that podium, nobody cares. Nobody should care what John Kirby thinks about you pick it. All you should care about, and all the American people should care about, is the why. Why is the president doing this? Why is the Secretary of Defense ordering that? Why? And I always thought it was important for me to be able to answer that question and put my personal stuff in a box. And then when the crisis is over, if it ever does get over, then you can unpack it. When you have time, you can sit and unpack it. And I'll be honest with you, I'm out of office now a year, and I'm still unpacking. I'm still going through all this stuff and trying to figure out what I feel, what I think about the stuff that we did or the stuff that we didn't do. I don't have any good answers, but now I have the luxury of doing that. When you're in the office, when you're at that podium, when you're in the hot seat, that's not your place. And I think it would be malpractice for a spokesman to allow personal to encroach on the professional to that degree. That's probably an unsatisfying response to a journalist. That is my honest.
Had to try.
That's great. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Kirby. Thank you so very much. This audience has been hanging on your every word, and we so appreciate both of you all being here today. Next week we have Wendy Stewart, Global Banking President for Bank of America, and Donna Hyland, President and CEO of Children's Healthcare. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you for coming. We are adjourned.